Welcome to the Jaime Fleres Podcast, a soulful sanctuary for creatives, leaders, and heart-centered humans navigating the edges of creativity, authentic expression, and personal growth. I'm your host, Jaime Fleres, author, transformational guide, and founder of Whale Song Creative. And today I'm coming in solo to share with you some of the most important insights that I have gained in my own personal journey around the art of relationship, and particularly how to navigate rupture and repair and conflict inside of relationships. This is one of those things that has been one of the biggest treasures of my own personal growth journey, developing these skills, these perspectives, these tools, these ways of operating in relationship. So many of us are not handed a strong and healthy map or a set of tools in order to navigate relationships. We're not always taught how to repair conflict, how to navigate difference inside relationship. And we see this proliferate in our culture, right? We see this like kind of adversary cancel culture all around us. We see kind of a social media culture that is sometimes a little too spicy for its own good, sometimes not as relationally minded as it could be. And we have these patterns within our cultures, these patterns of domination and ways of being with each other that can sometimes be manipulative or unskillful, unsupportive. And so when we find ourselves in relationships that really matter to us, those that we care about, we sometimes find ourselves lacking these skills in how to be with ourselves and be with others, especially when we are in a misaligned moment or a misattunement or something isn't going right and we have to navigate that. What I'd like to share with you today is a portion of the wisdom that I'm sure is available here. This is not going to be an exhaustive discussion, but I hope it will be meaty and rich. And, a lot of this work really comes from some of my best and brightest teachers. And so I pay homage to them with so much gratitude for the ways that I've engaged in this work from those who've come before me. So many of us are, would benefit from these skills, would be able to, bring these into our relationships, but we need to learn them, right? So if we didn't learn them in our family of origin, we might not have the skill set. So we need to go find them as adults and learn these skills and bring them into our relationships. So, I think oftentimes we fear rupture in relationships. We take rupture as a sign of the ending of a relationship rather than an opportunity for growth and depth. We're going to get into the complexities of that a little bit more. But ruptures are inherently inevitable in relationships because you have two people or more, and each has different needs and wants and preferences, different perspectives, different histories, different priorities at any given moment, biological, emotional, mental, and otherwise, and a different landscape, a different way. So rupture is inevitable in connection because you're dealing with two different humans, right? Or more. So we know that it's not necessarily a problem. It's a feature of relationship. Like it's bound to happen, right? And again, there's complexity in the kind of rupture, the impact of rupture, and all of that, which we're going to talk about. But so many of us don't know how to do repair work in relationships. We often think that rupture signals the automatic ending of a relationship, or we don't have the skills or the capacity or the desire to mend, right? We don't know how. Sometimes our past experiences keep us from approaching repair and mending and navigating conflict inside relationships. So for many of us, right, if we're all walking around kind of poorly taught how to repair, what genuine repair looks like, many of us have a repertoire of past experiences where rupture has been poorly mended, where we maybe have never felt fully seen, fully heard, fully understood, or honored for our experiences and the impact of a relational situation or dynamic on us. And so those situations may have us feeling discouraged about the possibility of properly mended ruptures in relationship. We might not have an experience of that. We might not know what it feels like. We might not know how to gesture toward it. So that's part of what I'd like to explore with you today. The other thing is that many of us develop these emotional shields as we go through life because of what has reasonably hurt us. So, we have these emotional shields, these protective strategies, these defense strategies, we all do, and they're meant to protect us from the vulnerability that repair requires, right? So to say that we're hurt, to say that we're impacted or influenced by someone else, or to, on the other side, admit and take account for the fact that our actions had impact, even if they weren't intended. So, on the side where we may have been someone who influenced another in a way that was harmful or hurtful, we have to find that place where we can hold accountability without shame, right? Where we don't fall into, either minimizing someone or falling into the shame for our behavior. Like, how can we stay in that middle path of accountability and being able to be with what is transpired? So sometimes we hold things against ourselves or others because we feel that if we're harsh or judgmental or critical or even shamed or ashamed, it will somehow protect us from harm again or from making a mistake again. So again, these are like these built-in barriers and shields that we develop through time. Resentment and anger can be attempts in our system to, one, just indicate that something is hurt and unresolved, but also that, we need this protection or this buffer against what hurts. So these armored stances can protect us, right? But they can also keep us stuck and out of connections that feel really nourishing and supportive. So, there's a lot of nuance in this territory, right? We want to be protected and connected inside of a relationship. That's a line from one of my brilliant teachers, Yvette Erasmus, who is fantastic in this realm. If you want to dive into, more on what we're talking about today, she's a fantastic resource and has an amazing podcast herself called Conversations from the Heart. And I highly recommend it. But anyway, we want to be protected and connected in relationship, but sometimes those defense structures that we've built in the past in order to survive, we end up outgrowing or outliving, and they end up being like clothing that used to fit and used to protect our bodies, but now is too tight and prevents us from, right? Prevents movement, prevents our expression, prevents the kinds of relationships that we want. So it helps to build skill and awareness and options for how to navigate conflicts in relationships. Now, of course, I'm not speaking to any one individual within a context right now. So this is general musing, general information, and, apply this as needed. And, every relationship and every situation has its own context. So I can't obviously speak to everyone's individual context here. But I do think that there are some universal principles and ways of thinking about rupture and repair in relationship that have really, really helped me that I would love to share with you today. So how can we work through rupture? How can we work through those inevitable misfires, misattunements that happen inside of a connection, right? And when we think about rupture and these misattunements, right, there's obviously a range of situations. Things can be small, little minor things that happen inevitably in the course of a relationship. Others can have more impact, be more of a stronger rupture, require a different level of care. So again, I'm going to speak generally here. But when we find ourselves in a connection, in a relationship where something is triggering us, or we're having, some kind of another person's behavior, their actions, or even their inactions are having a negative impact on us in some way, we want to take time to slow the process down. So we all know what it's like to react to a stimulus, right? Something happens, we have a feeling, and immediately we respond to it, right? We want to make as much space between that stimulus and the response as possible, especially if there's a lot of charge there. So especially in relationships where we are, committed to an ongoing healthy dynamic, we want to, we want the skills of the pause, going slow, and taking time out and space when we need them. So these are key moves inside of a healthy relationship, is being able to do those, taking these pauses. Oftentimes when we are the one requesting a timeout, it's helpful, it's relational for us to make an agreement about when we'll return. Like, hey, something's not sitting here well with me, or I notice that I'm having a lot of emotion about what's happening. I need a minute. Or, can I come back to you this afternoon? Or can we talk about this tomorrow? Or, some kind of indication of like when you'd like to loop around. That isn't always, sometimes rupture happens and we're not even aware until we're later processing, like, something went wrong back there, I need to go pick that up. So, we can also take the time we need to metabolize and process, and which is what we're going to talk about here more, and then come back to somebody like, hey, I was really thinking about that conversation we had last Sunday or in 1994, and I wanted to bring that up again. I wanted to talk about that, right? So we can bring things forward. But when we find ourselves in a connection where something is triggering or we find a moment of attunement or something's happening, it can be helpful to take some space. So we all know how it goes when we immediately react and respond, and we're coming from defensiveness, or we're coming from victim, or we're coming from a story, right? So we want to take some space to do some inner work first. So one thing that's helpful to notice, and we'll talk about this more as we get into the process, is that we might notice our response to a situation might be out of proportion to the current circumstances, right? That is often an indicator that something historic in us is getting touched. Now, that doesn't mean that what you're experiencing in that current dynamic isn't valid or isn't its own issue, right? But we can notice when our history is being activated, because it often is in relationship, right? Relationship is where we experience relational rupture and pain. It's also where we heal it. So it's to be expected that our history will get activated in relationship. It's part of the features. It's one of the features of relationship. And so we might need some time to tease apart what's current and what's residue from the past that is still valid and valuable. But we want to know that for ourselves, like what's actually specific to this relationship and this experience, and what is historic. That can be helpful as we're working toward repair. So there's a difference in relationships, right? Especially intimate relationships. How do we navigate the fact that inevitably historic information, historic situations will come up? Now, I find the less helpful way to do that is to make the other person responsible for healing those wounds inside of us or those histories inside of us, right? We project things onto people. We expect them to kind of do the things differently, right? But that's not necessarily the most helpful approach. There's also the way that we're not expecting the other person to do the heavy lifting and of tending to our past, but we take those opportunities during rupture or misattunement as an opportunity to tend ourselves first. And then we can come to that person, whether we're in a close friendship or a work dynamic or an intimate relationship, and give an opportunity, create an opportunity for healing to happen, right? And ideally, in relationship ruptures, as much as we can practice this, right? All of this is about practice, not perfection. We might want to go inside and do the inner work first. So it's common for us when we don't necessarily have the skills or the capacity to obsess over or hyper focus on the other person's actions or inactions, what they did or didn't do, the details of the story. But when we're only focused out there on what someone else has done or hasn't done, we're not actually in our place of agency and of effectiveness. Of course, we're going to attend to the situation and see what has been so, but we also need to bring it back home. We need this capacity to come back into our own center and into our own experience, into our own lane, and do the inside work first. So here's what that inside work can look like. So can be what happens in the pause, what happens between conversations, between stimuli, as you're kind of working out what's going on within you. And this is that place where we can move with more skillfulness and more relationality. But we first need to come in and do the relationship work inside. So what that looks like is being able to separate the story from our observations. So how we feel about something, what's going on inside of us, what's actually transpired, allowing us some space between what happened out there and what's happening in here can be really helpful. I have done a lot of work around the layers of a story, which you can check out in my book, The Author Adventure, and I've shared it elsewhere. That's a little beyond the conversation today, but being able to separate what happened from how we feel about it to what meaning we're making of it is a really helpful skill. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the end. But the first thing to do really as we're taking that time out is just to breathe, just to slow everything down. It can be really helpful at first just to notice the sensations in your body. So actually make contact with yourself, with your body. Now, of course, this is also beyond the scope, but if you understand the nervous system, you can kind of check in with where you are in your nervous system. So again, this is work that I've talked about elsewhere, all of the somatic work that I teach inside my program, Soma. But for now, what we want to just notice is what's alive in our body. Is your chest tense? Is your mind racing? Do you feel like your vision has narrowed? Is your heart beating fast? Do you feel braced or tensed or defensive? Like, how are you actually feeling in your body? Just noticing the sensations in our body. And even during a time of rupture or misattunement in a relationship, we can use our body signs to notice whether we're regulated or not. And there's nothing wrong with dysregulation, but it's information. So what's helpful to know is that when we are dysregulated, right, when we are out of our comfort zone, our zone of tolerance, we lose the ability to reason and act from our wisest self. And so those are good times to call a timeout. So it can be really helpful to make contact. And that happens as a practice too. So we don't only want to make contact with our somatic experience when we're in conflict, right? That's kind of a higher stakes scenario. So it can be helpful if we're wanting to step toward more healthy relationship is to practice making regular contact with our own felt experience. So we want to do that. When we're in this kind of cocoon of support while we're doing some metabolization of the events and circumstances that we've had a response to that have created rupture or unease in our relationships, we want to make contact with that sensation in our body. We also want to, if we have the opportunity, we can move the energy in our body in a healthy way. Sometimes that looks like taking a walk. It could be singing or making some kind of vocal sound. It could be moving your body in some way. It could be doing something, it could be connecting with nature, whether that's a houseplant or going outside or whatever. We want to do something that supports our system to kind of come back into capacity and resource. So that can be a really helpful thing to do in this kind of like interim period before we come back for repair, because it makes it more possible. So, and then the next thing we want to do is be able to just name really simply what we're feeling. So you can get complex with it if you want to get really specific and name the exact emotion. Nonviolent communication is a beautiful body of work that you can even Google like nonviolent communication feelings lists, and you can get a whole range of like different kinds of emotions, the names for different emotions. And sometimes naming an emotion really specifically can be helpful, but sometimes we just want to play in like the primary colors of feeling. We want to just be able to name what we're feeling. So we might want to just play in those primary emotions, which are sad, angry, happy, scared, disgust, surprise. You might add a few others that feel relevant, but we want to just play in those basic emotions. Just being able to name what we feel and what is painful to us, how we're actually experiencing it, what we're actually feeling, without minimization, without rationalization, just being able to feel cleanly and clearly, without amping up the storytelling, without minimizing. None of that. We want to stay out of rationalization and the story mind, the mental body. We want to just let our feelings be felt. Oh, I feel really disappointed. Oh, I'm feeling really hurt. I'm feeling scared about, and again, you don't even need to really go into the story, but I'm feeling scared, right? So just being able to name the emotion really cleanly for ourselves is really, really helpful. Now, if we notice that this is historic, we might want to check in. So this is the next thing. So we've felt our felt sense sensation. We felt our body. We've done something to address the feeling the feeling state, the somatic experience that we're having. We've named our emotions really clearly. The next thing we might want to check out is how this connects to our own history. So this reminds me of the story I notice coming up is like the story I'm telling myself about this situation or what this is in relationship, like being able to own our own history. Like, gosh, this really reminds me of that time when, right? Again, compassion. We're just kind of noticing what history it's activating. We may or may not know either. We might know like, oh, this feels historic, but I don't really know what that's about for me. It might take some time to process, but we want to be able to own our own history. And again, that's not to say like the current situation doesn't matter because this is just historic. They both matter, right? So the next step is to discover what we need in the relationship, in the situation. What do we need? Now, there's lots of ways to get into this, right? Nonviolent communication has a list of needs, the universal needs, the needs that all of us have. That can be a great place to start as we're getting aware of what we need. I will say that If you're like, I don't even know what I need, like even asking myself what my needs are is a new question. Some ways to find your needs, to explore your needs, are to ask yourself what you're tolerating, what you're overriding, what irritates or drains you. Those can kind of give you clues into what you might be needing. But what do you need in this situation? What would help? So, again, we can kind of be basic and general around like our universal needs, find them through their absence. Like, what are we tolerating, overriding, or what is irritating us? But we can also ask, like, what would actually help in this situation, right? So sometimes we get really caught up in what's wrong and what happened and why it was bad and what needs to be different. But we can also kind of focus on like what would help now, right? Again, not to minimize all of that, but to move forward. What would actually be helpful now? So, some things to consider. Do you need the impact of that situation witnessed? Do you need to be witnessed in, what that brought up for you without fixing or without minimizing? Like what would actually help? Do you need to reveal the history that touched so that another can be made aware of their impact? What do you need? Do you need a change in behavior from another person? Right now, we have to be careful there because we're not in charge of other people's behavior, but we can make requests. We can talk about behavioral impact on us. Is there a boundary that's needed, right? Is there an agreement that we need to put in place in this relationship in order for it to serve both parties or all of the parties involved? Is closure required, like in this given? And we can talk about, some of that as we go forward. So getting clear on what we need in the relationship and what would help. Those can be really beautiful things to take to somebody in a repair situation that help us move forward. You might want to also explore for yourself, what are your yeses and nos in the situation? What are your non-negotiables? So I love, one of my teachers, Kristen, used to always say this, and it's stayed with me ever since. Our needs are non-negotiable. So the fact that you have needs, so one thing we can do here that's supportive is we can dedicate ourselves to getting our needs met. Now, our needs are non-negotiable, so we can commit to that. So how our needs get met, by whom, when, all of those things, how we get to our needs getting met is something that is negotiable. And it's a place where we can get creative. So we might find that we have a need that is absolutely valid and cannot be met in a particular relationship, or cannot be met in a particular way, or cannot be met within certain conditions that might be preferable to you. So those are important to know and to notice. So we're going to talk about that more a little bit further on, but we want to be able to honor our needs, advocate for our needs, and recognize that not all needs can be met by all people at all times. And so we bring all of that wisdom and awareness to the party. When we discover our needs, so this is where sometimes personal growth work can get a little tricky, is that we can sometimes take a tool and use it as a weapon against another person. So I've seen this go wrong with nonviolent communication, where someone discovers they have a need and then they go around demanding that it be met in certain ways. Or there's sort of this like forcing, or, hey, I've discovered this need and you're required to meet it now. So we want to always, with all of this, check our own energy. What is our come from? What is the energy from which we're engaging? So when we find that there's a need in a situation, we discover something that would help or make it better, we want to come back to the relationship with the energy of request, with the energy of like, let me show you what would help. And then we can talk about getting it met rather than a demand energy. Other questions to ask. This is still kind of like the inside job territory. Who do I want to be in this situation? So what are the values that I want to lead with? Because it's who I am. Right? So if I have a value of bringing curiosity and compassion to a connection, like how do I bring that into this situation? How do I gesture from my own inner code of conduct, my own inner code of integrity? You might want to ask yourself that, like, what are the values that I really want to bring here? What am I going to bat for in this connection that actually really matters to me? What are the choices I have here? And how do I kind of just assess those? What do I notice about my own patterns of withdrawal and engagement here? So again, relationship styles, attachment styles, strategies, that's kind of a little bit beyond this conversation. But what is can we notice? So I have a whole body of work called the Circle of Sovereignty, and it's about these 4 ways that we step out of our own sovereignty within relationship. And so those 4 ways are power over and power under. Like, are we feeling righteous, better than, justified, like all of that power over? Are we seeking to dominate and control? Are we in that power under position? Are we in a story of victimization, of powerlessness, of coercion through that bottom, like power under position? Are we pushing or pulling? So that's the dynamic that moves in the lateral direction or in the horizontal direction. Is, are we pushing something away? Are we pulling something toward us, right? Noticing where we're clinging or grabbing or drawing something closer to try to get to control it, or pushing something away in order to be able to manage it. We want to be aware of those patterns of behavior and those power patterns of relating inside of ourselves as we're navigating our own lane in the face of relational rupture or what have you. We also want to notice defensiveness, projection. Where are we putting our own emotions, our own experiences onto someone else? Where are we making guesses or assumptions that may not be true? Where are we colluding with others in a story, relational story? So again, those are all just like there's lots of places we can take this because we're in really rich territory here. But these are all things. Now, of course, that can all feel like a lot at first. Like it's going to take me hours to do all of that, right? This is something that we practice. And as we practice gesturing in these ways, we get better and better at it and it becomes more second nature, right? So at first, even in my journey, like at first it was nice to go to the list and be like, okay, what do I do? Oh yeah, that's right. I check in with my body. I feel my feelings. I name my feelings. I check for needs, and then I, ask some of these questions, consider what would help, So you might want to, take notes, come back here, listen again, take some notes and practice. It's like anything. It's like the first time you're speaking a language, like you need to practice it to get better at it, right? So eventually these things can become our internal process. The more and more we practice these things, they can become second nature. But at first, we might need those training wheels, right? We might need a little bit of structural support. All of those things, as much as we can, do some of that inside work and metabolize the energy that's been brought up in us, the often more effective we can be as we come back into connection. So those are all really helpful things to do in our own lane. And then we have the next step, which is stepping back toward the other. So before we even get into the conversation, still in that inner work, we have kind of like a middle space here, which is, there's a few questions I have for you here, which is, can I find any curiosity around what the other person is experiencing? Again, without story or projection, can I just get do I have capacity for some curiosity here? Am I willing to look for their humanity in this situation? It might be yes, it might be no, but am I willing to look? Am I willing to get curious about what was happening for them? Again, not making a story or an assumption or a conclusion about what was happening for them, but can I get curious? Can I ask the question? Can I wonder? Is there capacity in me to soften my heart toward them? And that's an honest question. Maybe yes, maybe no, but that's good information for us. It's helpful for us to understand, and this is a reckoning for a lot of us, is that sometimes people in pain or shame or just limits to their own capacity or skill building cannot meet us in the ways that we want to be met. They don't have the skills, they don't have the awareness, they don't have the capacity. We may have to grieve what isn't possible in a connection. So grief is like always in the territory, always on the field when it comes to relationship, capacity to repair, capacity to move through, navigate challenge with one another, right? There's always an opportunity. There's always that possibility, I should say, that someone won't be able to meet us, right? That's risky. It's inherently risky to be in relationship and to be vulnerable to one another, right? But the rewards are often great, especially when we can be effective in navigating ourselves toward those. We can also ask ourselves, is there a way that I can report out my thoughts, feelings, sensations, stories from a place of, some degree of observation or witness energy? Do I have the capacity to step toward this person and be like, I'm making up a story about you, that you're a terrible human and this and this and this, and I'm noticing that when I think that, right? Or can you step towards someone, in a relationship that you're in and say, I noticed that I have a lot of anxiety about this thing that's been happening to us. Like, can we report an experience? Can we report out? Can we reveal our inner landscape rather than like kind of hurling it at somebody and using it as a weapon? Like, you made me this, or, is there a way that we can report out or reveal what we found inside? Is that available to us? What level of distance or closeness would feel right to you right now? What are the terms of engagement that might support your continued connection there within that connection if it's still mutually desired? And is direct communication desired, possible, and consensual here? That's a question you might have to ask. So you've done all the inner work. You've done your own, like, what's in my lane? What's happened here? And then you're also beginning to do that. Can I get curious about this person? Do I have openness and capacity to soften toward their experience, to step toward them here? What is the right distance? What is the right next gesture for you, right? So you're getting some of that clarity. So the next step is to make request for connection. So again, we don't want to come in guns blazing, like, you will listen to me and you will listen to me now, right? That's not necessarily the best way to step forward towards somebody. We want to always come with respect for one another's sovereignty, with our agency, with our capacity. We really want to honor one another. So you might ask for the space and what you'd like to bring into it. So one of my teachers teaches, like, hey, if you've got, if you're wanting to have a conversation with somebody, like, say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this. I think I'll need probably like 20 or 30 minutes. Do you have capacity right now? So it's always good. You're more likely to have success in your repair conversation if the other person is genuinely available for it, right? So if we're coming to someone who's exhausted or hasn't eaten in a while or is under-resourced, they may not, that conversation, that repair conversation might not go the best. So we want to have consent for, like, are you available for this conversation? Again, we don't want to rush anything or anything, but if we can just kind of set somebody up for something. One of my teachers always recommends, this might be helpful depending on the situation, like letting someone know that they're not in trouble. Like, we're not coming with the blame, shame, judgment story. We're coming in a collaborative way. So you might want to gesture that energy at first, right? Express goodwill. Show that you actually care about the connection, even if there's hurt, right? Even if there are things that need to be discussed. That can be helpful, kind of to diffuse the intensity or the sense of threat that someone might feel if we're like, hey, we need to talk, right? If there's space, again, this depends on the situation, but if there's space for any goodwill, like any gesture of goodwill, any appreciation that feels available to you, like, hey, I want you to know that I really appreciate about our connection, about the conversation, about whatever it is, if that's available and it's genuine for you, that can be a gesture of goodwill that can really help you in a repair conversation. Again, it may or may not be appropriate depending on the situation. We want to do our best to come from a curious, co-creative, and respectful space as much as we can. So if we're not in that space yet, we might not have done the metabolization that we need yet, the processing that we need. So we might need to go back a step, take some more time to figure out what's happening on our side of the street. Right. So once we do step toward that person, we've got consent, we might be leading with appreciation. We want to be able to reveal our ouch without weaponizing it. So this is what hurts. Like, it's kind of like showing somebody something. It's a vulnerable thing to do. This isn't necessarily appropriate in all situations, but when there's enough goodwill and safety, and we're going to talk about when repair isn't possible. But we're assuming in this moment that repair is something that we're willing to step toward, that we're safe to step toward. So we want to be able to reveal our ouch without weaponizing it. We want to reveal and share what is alive within us, the impact that another had on us, or our own reflections about the impact of our actions, without that blame, shame, or judgment as much as possible. That's kind of the energy that we want to bring. Here's actually, let's talk next, just take a little side street here, a little detour quickly to talk about when repair isn't possible. So repair in relationship is not always the best approach, although when it's possible, we want to try to step toward it. But here are some situations where repair isn't possible or isn't necessarily the ideal course of action. One, if another person, including if you or another person, would be harmed by that act of repair, right? So if there's any harm that would transpire as a result of you taking that action toward repair. That's maybe a counter indication here of doing repair work. If that willingness to explore repair isn't mutual, like if you actually don't have consent from the other party, if the other party has set a clear boundary against that communication or that conversation, then we have to be in consent. So there has to be this willingness mutually to repair and explore. If it's not, repair might not be possible. Repair isn't necessarily an ideal move to make or step toward when your safety, emotional, physical, mental, like if your safety is at risk in any way or is under question, repair may not be the best place to step, right? If your goal in repair is just to alleviate your own discomfort, prove that you're right, show that the other person is wrong, but not to engage the relational complexity, own your side, give another person an opportunity to explore their side, then repair is not necessarily the best step. Also, if you haven't done your own processing, right? If you're still reactive, if you're still defensive, if you're still righteous, if you're still in a victim story, if you're still, and again, none of those are wrong. Those are all indications that we haven't we haven't tended our own side of the street, right? So if things are unprocessed on our side of the street, repair it might not be an ideal time for repair, right? So we'll talk in a moment about how we can step toward our own healing if repair isn't possible. So we'll talk about that in a moment. But I want to step back to the conditions of effective repair. Y'all, this to me is a game changer because again, so many of us don't know how to do repair well. Oftentimes we are met with another person's justification or story or defense. Like, we're not often met with healthy repair. So this piece is so important. If you've been listening to this, like, pay extra close attention to this part because this part is gold. The conditions of effective repair. So again, we're all walking around with experiences of ineffective repair. Even if someone said they were sorry, but we didn't actually feel like they meant it. So here are the 5 things that are really required for relational repair. And again, repair is relationship focused and it's action oriented, right? So number 1 is clear acknowledgement of the impact. If there was hurt, if there was harm, doesn't matter if it was intentional or unintentional, the ability to clearly acknowledge impact is the first step in repair. To be able to witness and validate another person's experience, even if it wasn't our own or even if it wasn't intentional, right? That step of being able to acknowledge impact is huge. I see that really hurt you. I see that really scared you. I can understand how that would have felt really upsetting to you, right? I can see how that would have disappointed you. Like, those moves are one step in the repair process. Being able to genuinely express regret or remorse or just genuine care. I actually really care about how you feel in this situation without minimizing, without gaslighting, without glossing over, without negating or running into a story of how we were right or we didn't mean it, right? If we can just express genuine care and also not collapse into shame. So shame is a good way to cut off the relational lifeblood between two people is when we fall into shame. And again, shame is a natural part of the human experience. But when we fall into shame, we often are cut off from that relationality. So being able to express genuine care, genuine remorse, genuine goodwill toward another person is also a really important thing, a really important aspect of effective repair. The third thing is meaningful reparative action that would somehow contribute to the relationship. What can you offer to rebuild trust? What would make it better, right? What can you ask for that would help rebuild trust, right? Now, if you're the one who has unintentionally or intentionally caused harm or rupture or misattunement, you don't necessarily want to put this on the other person. You want to be thoughtful and creative about what you think could help also. So we don't want to just be like, okay, I'm sorry, but what can I do to make it up to you? Right now we're putting the burden on the other person. It might be a helpful relational move for us to imagine what we could do in that situation. What could we do that would make it better? Number 4 is committing to putting that new understanding or realization into action. So some kind of commitment to a behavioral change. I'm going to do this. I'm not going to do this, right? And that is a big piece of repair. Making new agreements. How will we gesture differently, right? And that could happen on both sides. This requires follow through, though, to actually rebuild trust. So we can't just say, so it can actually be injurious to the relationship if we promise a change in behavior to do or not do something, to gesture in a certain way or not, and then we don't follow through. So this is where integrity is really important, is keeping to our agreements, right? And we might not get it perfectly. We might have another rupture and have to repair, right? But we want to be genuine in what we feel we can offer here in terms of change going forward. And then the 5th piece is being able to work with one another's boundaries and their needs, right? So we need to, in both directions, we need to care about each other's boundaries, care about each other's needs, care about one another, and move forward, being able to work through and negotiate through some of that. effective repair has to be two-way, right? It's not just like one way, right? Usually in many ruptures, there's usually an owning of, we each own our part in a situation. So that can also be a very important part of effective repair, is that two-way street of owning our own stuff, our own experience, the impact that we've experienced, etc. So we won't get deeply into forgiveness here, but just say briefly, forgiveness here, willingness to step forward, right, within that repair situation doesn't necessarily mean that you condone and feel like whatever behavior happened or whatever didn't happen was great and fine. But there's a way that we move forward here. Being able to offer generosity and curiousness and heart softening toward one another is important in the effective repair process as well. So I'll just leave it at that. So I want to give an example. It's just a small example I had with a friend recently where we were relating in a certain way, and I came across some new information in that dynamic, and I wanted to gesture differently. And my knee-jerk reaction was to kind of just like pull out of the situation. Like, I'm out. This is not for me. Like, this is a non-negotiable. I'm out, right? And I did that. I actually put a big boundary up and was like, no, thank you. I need to step back from this connection. And I noticed that for me, that felt like too strong of a response. Like, as I did more processing and came to do my own metabolization, I was like, actually, I want to take account for the impact of that too. Like, that really strong shutting the door, I know had impact, and I actually want to repair that. Like, even if I choose not to be close with this person or, gesture in our relationship the same way, I want to take responsibility for the impact that my like sudden door slam had on them. So I came back to this person and I said, I imagine, so this was my repair work. Like, I imagine that me shutting the door on you really quickly like that probably didn't feel very good. Probably left you feeling a little shocked, maybe hurt. I know that you were vulnerable with me. You shared, intimately and vulnerably with me. And I really did. Like, I shared impact. Like, I imagine that this is the impact I had. We also want to get curious. Like, would you like to, tell me more? Is that true? Did I get it right? How was that for you? Right? We want to stay curious and conversational in these repair experiences, right? So I wanted to listen, like, how was that actually for you? And we talked, and, we were kind of like finding our way in that repair conversation. So the other thing that's helpful is not to just come in being like, this is the outcome. This is how it's going to go. We want to be open in conversations to co-creating the way forward with another person, right? So in this situation, we had been talking about, okay, is there a place that you and I can be in connection that feels good to both of us? And I made the commitment to him as part of my repair that I wouldn't slam the door like that on our connection that way, that if I had something that was going on for me, that I would bring it to him in a way that was more relational. Like, even if I wanted to step out of the connection, I would have a conversation first. Like, that was my commitment. That was something that I felt that I could commit to in that connection that would help rebuild trust, that he would know that I wasn't just going to slam the door on him unexpectedly, right? Because that feeling of like someone could go unexpectedly at any moment, like, that does not breed security in a connection, right? So I made a commitment that I would have a conversation first. That was my repair. That was my commitment to new action. And I also asked, like, we had a conversation about what we each needed, what would work for us, what our boundaries were, and I was able to reveal what was happening for me in that situation without blame, shame, or judgment on either side. Just like, hey, this is what was going on. Are you curious to know? I'd love to share. Like, this is what was going on for me. I'd love to hear what was going on for you, right? So these are all just one experience, but like a relational gesture, a way of kind of navigating these conversations. And even in that particular conversation, there was playfulness and joy brought in. And, we were joking about going 60 miles an hour and then all of a sudden getting ejected out of a car, and like, what would it look like to go 20 miles an hour? And we were having fun with it, right? Repair doesn't have to be so serious, right? We can have fun with it, and we can be playful in some circumstances, not all, but we can bring that relationality in, even while we're expressing boundaries and care and talking about our needs and what would work for us and what wouldn't work for us. Like, we can bring in that goodwill toward one another and that respect for one another. So that's just one example. Other examples would be much more complex. Like, if I were talking about relationships with family members, like that would be, I would share with you how I navigated those situations in different ways. So again, sometimes repair like this is possible in relationships and sometimes it's not. And so when we don't have the opportunity to kind of do that communication work, right? Because us or like we or the people that we're engaged with don't have the capacity, don't have the skills, don't have the willingness, we don't have that consent. What are the other things that we can do? So because we still have that energy, right? We have this thing in our culture of like, not when one of us really wants closure or a conversation, it's not possible. Like, how do we get closure ourselves? So there are ways for us to come to peace within ourselves after a relational rupture or a relational ending, even if we don't get to have this direct conversation, right? Even if we don't get to have this repair conversation, there are still ways that we can repair and tend and care for ourselves in the situation. So some options here are, we can symbolically make amends, right? Whether we were someone who harmed or someone who received harm, we can do our own emotional healing, our own inner work. We can make gestures of repair that are not necessarily intended toward a specific person, right? So if we were someone who caused harm, for example, or hurt, we might not be able to go back and repair in that situation, but we might make a commitment to ourselves moving forward about how we're going to gesture going forward, right? This is how I'm going to act moving forward. And that can be a gesture of repair for ourselves. We can also experience relational repair in a different circumstance, in a different context. So this can look like going to another a trusted friend, family member, therapist, professional. We can do that repair work tangentially with another person. We can do the processing. We can talk about what hurt. We can talk about the needs that are inherent, that, reasonably need to be met. Like, we can do that repair work, that relational work in a different context, right? We can get our needs met in different places, right? We can get that need to be witnessed, or that clarity around what we need and what we don't need, or what would help us or not help us, or feel good or not good in relationships. We can take that work to another place, right? And get some of that closure and get some of that processing, and that relational work can happen elsewhere. So that's another place. We can choose to live forward differently, which I talked about a little bit. We can do our own inner work around boundaries. We can have self-compassion, self-forgiveness. We can take some time to harvest the wisdom from an experience, what we learned about life, about others, about ourselves. We can harvest an experience for that wisdom, even if we weren't able to get repair or experience repair inside that specific connection or in that specific situation. And we can also grieve. So like I said, grief is always in the field when it comes to relationship and rupture and navigating challenge, is that some things need to be grieved cleanly. We have to be with what is so, which is the limits of certain relationships, the ability for others to meet us in certain spaces or not, their mutual desire to have the kind of relationship that we want, to gesture in a particular way, right? There's a lot of grief when we can't be met. Grief can come out sideways. It can come out like control or harboring resentment, all those things, if we are not able to feel it cleanly. So sometimes part of this is being able to just clearly and fully process and metabolize our own grief. Again, another conversation. So a couple of things that can help here, in addition to these, is ritual. So some kind of ritual gesture, a ritual for ourselves, some kind of release process, some kind of reconnection process. Ritual can be helpful, especially in places where we can't have repair. In addition to working with other trusted, safe others in a relational space, unwritten letters can be really helpful. It can be a place where we can really process and metabolize our experiences. I also have a program called Heal a Story That Hurts that helps us kind of go back to those kind of like scar tissue-y moments of our past, of our relational past, and begin to like melt that tissue and help ourselves do that inner work, that like, this is my lane work. So Heal a Story That Hurts is also some work that you can connect with me around and we can go further with, especially if you have some like older pieces of things that happen, older situations for which you didn't experience repair in your life. Those can be places that you can work through that process and help metabolize that unresolved energy, things that have not been repaired. So I will leave you here for now as far as relationship repair and rupture and navigating these complexities. There's more I could share. Well, like there's a million tangents from this conversation that I can go on. Of course, not all nuance can be accounted for here, but hopefully something here was really supportive in your journey around relationship. So I'd love to hear what felt resonant for you. So you can always reach out to me at jamie@jamiefleres.com. And thank you so much. Thanks for joining me on this episode of the Jaime Fleres Podcast. If you loved the episode, I would so appreciate if you would share it with somebody that you think would benefit, so these conversations can continue to spread and help others. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss an episode. Your reviews are also so greatly appreciated. They're what help us be found by others so that these conversations can do their good in the world. If you want to check out my work, all my links are in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us today. I look forward to connecting with you again.